Welcome to this special edition of Talking Politics with me, Robert Peston. Now, I've been speaking to the Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, about the prospects for peace in Ukraine in the wake of that extraordinary intervention we've seen from the new American president, Donald Trump, and essentially how he feels about Trump negotiating Ukraine's future without the involvement of Kyiv and simply talking to the man that he says that he admires in many ways, Vladimir Putin of Moscow.
President Trump obviously will make such calls as he thinks appropriate. There's no negotiations about Ukraine, which doesn't involve Ukraine.
On top of that, we've also discussed, to a slightly lesser extent, but still important stuff, his plans for new towns across the country. Here's that interview in full. Prime Minister, very good to see you. The suffering that the Ukrainian people have endured is beyond words. Yesterday, we saw the American President, Donald Trump, spend an hour and a half on the phone with Putin. He praised Putin, and all the signs are that he's about to give away Ukrainian land and even potentially sacrifice Ukrainian independence. That's not acceptable, is it?
Well, let's start with the suffering in Ukraine, because it's been a long conflict. It's Russian aggression, and there have been very many casualties, real suffering on the front line, but also suffering in the civilian population. And when I was in Kyiv just a few weeks ago, I saw some of those who've been on the front line in the burns unit of a hospital with terrible life-changing burns. And that really brought home to me the human impact of this awful conflict. I've long said and continue to say that Ukraine has to be in the strongest possible position. Ukrainians want this conflict to end. It could end tomorrow if Russia stopped the aggression and withdrew its troops. And we must never lose sight of that. But Ukraine needs to be in the strongest possible position. Ukrainians want peace. Those that have had to flee the country want to go back to their country. But this has to be led by Ukraine. There's no negotiations about Ukraine, which doesn't involve Ukraine, and Ukraine needs to be in the strongest possible position.
And just to be clear, the American Defense Secretary said yesterday, no return to the 2014 borders, no possibility of Ukraine joining membership. No possibility of Ukraine joining NATO. What is your position on that?
Well, my position is the NATO position. This was discussed at the summit that we had last year in Washington, where it was agreed amongst all NATO members that there should be an irreversible path for Ukraine to NATO membership.
And you have backed away from that, to be absolutely clear.
No, obviously nobody was expecting that to be immediate. It was a pathway over time. But what matters most, I think, is that we stand by Ukraine, we put Ukraine in the strongest possible position, and that we make sure that if there is a cessation of hostilities, if there's an end to the fighting, that any peace which is desperately needed and wanted is just, and it is lasting and capable of enduring. And what we don't want to see is simply a pause in the fighting that gives Russia the space and the opportunity to rearm and go again. So any stopping of the fighting has to be a lasting peace.
Just on that issue of a lasting peace, if it is secured, Pete Hegseth, Defense Secretary, wants French and UK troops in Ukraine policing that peace. Are you open to that?
Well, I won't get into the particular capabilities, but I do accept that if there is peace, then there needs to be some sort of security guarantee for Ukraine, and the UK will play its part in that. I've made that very clear to President Zelensky. But we do need that to be a guarantee that has US backing. And again, I've been very clear about that. The precise makeup of that is obviously a matter of some discussion, but both of those factors need to be there, and of course needs to be coordinated with NATO.
And would you echo Donald Trump's praise for Putin's common sense, his words?
Well, Putin is the aggressor here.
So you wouldn't praise Putin?
Putin is the aggressor. Putin's in breach of the UN Charter, in my view, and this conflict could be ended tomorrow if Putin withdrew his troops. And so for me, that will be the simplest and the quickest way to end this conflict.
Alex Younger, former head of MI6, says our red line should be that Ukraine is not a vassal state, that it remains an independent, viable state. Is that your red line?
Yes, it should remain an independent, viable state, and that's why it's very important that we put Ukraine in the strongest possible position. The future of Ukraine and Ukraine's decisions in the future should be taken by Ukrainians. I think that is really fundamental. But it's not just the sovereignty of Ukraine that's an issue here. It is our security across Europe. It's our values that are under threat, and that's why Ukraine is simply, for me, the frontier of a bigger conflict that has impact for the whole of Europe. That's why I actually accept what President Trump says about Europe having to do more. I do think, and have been arguing, that when it comes to defence and security, European nations, including the UK, should do more. Now, obviously, it's very important that the US is part of that. It's very important that NATO is maintained as the fighting force that it is, stronger now, I think, than it's ever been. But I actually accept the proposition when it comes to security and defence. We've all got to step up. And as a group of European countries, we should be stepping up. And that's a discussion I've been having with a number of leaders across Europe for some months now.
You still haven't got a date for even getting us to 2.5%. The Americans want us to spend 3% of GDP. Can you accelerate?
Well, we're going through a review at the moment, which is looking at the challenges we face, the capabilities we've got, and making sure that the two match up. That's well progressed now. And of course, we will set out a pathway to 2.5. As I've said, manifesto commitment. But alongside that, I want to make sure we've got the capability we need. And I would just make this observation. I felt it very keenly when I was in Kyiv just 2 or 3 weeks ago. Throughout this ghastly conflict, we have lessons to learn about warfare in Europe in the 21st century, and we need to learn those lessons as we look at our capabilities.
You've spent your entire life defending, promoting the rule of law, domestically, internationally. We're now seemingly in a world where strongmen, Trump, Putin, are making deals that decide the fate of nations, irrespective of the rule of law. What are you going to do about that?
Well, I think it is important that there is an end to this conflict. And of course, that's going to involve leaders talking to each other. And of course, that will
involve not making deals, as I say, that the Ukrainian capital has been plainly kept outside of.
Well, President Trump obviously will make such calls as he thinks appropriate. It's of course right that the Americans are at the heart of any negotiations, so I don't have any issue with that whatsoever. I do think it's important that we uphold the UN Charter, the basic principle that one country shouldn't invade another country, that aggression is not to be countenanced under the Charter. I do think more broadly that we do need to work with other countries when we're dealing with things like illegal migration. And we've secured some really important agreements with other countries to deal with illegal migration, precisely because we've been clear that they'll be done within the framework of international law. That's how security, that's how counterterrorism, that's how we tackle really serious crime.
New towns. When you think about what may be your legacy, how important is it for you that you actually get these towns built? If you think about the Labour government in the 1960s, that was the last government that actually created a substantial new town, Milton Keynes.
It is really important to me because this is about numbers, 1.5 million, but it's also about human lives and the security that owning your own home gives you. Now, when I was growing up, we didn't have a lot of money in our family, but we did own our own home. And that gave me a base camp from which I could go on to be a lawyer, go on to lead the Labour Party, and go on to be interviewed by you as Prime Minister. That's an emotional connection to a security of having your own home that I want families across the country to have. And that's
is it moving fast enough? I mean, because even you're saying that there won't even be a single new town by the end of the Parliament.
Well, let me push back on that. I first announced we'd have new towns in 2023, and the immediate pushback was Nobody wants a new town. You won't get any proposals. We set up the task force 6 months ago. We've moved at pace. Today we're announcing that 100 proposals have come in. So far from this sort of gloom-laden pitch that was put to me, actually across the country, in all regions, people are saying, yes, we want to be part of this. Obviously now we'll select from that 100. And these are not just homes. What I was seeing just outside Milton Keynes this morning was the school and the GP surgery that will be part of the community that we built. And yes, that really matters to me because in the end, this is an emotional connection of understanding what the security of having your own home means for individuals and families as the base camp for their opportunity and their aspiration.
I don't know if you saw, we did this really upsetting film yesterday about a new far-right group that is set up and actually is proliferating. There are branches all over the country. These groups, even though they are toxically racist, they talk about weapons, they talk about insurrection, they're not illegal under the current framework. Do you think it is this issue of where you draw the line between illegal and legal groupings of this sort needs to be reconsidered?
Well, I think on this issue, if there's use of knives or anything to do with violence, then it is illegal, and we should be clear about that. And there's been a tendency in the past sometimes to think that certain areas are sort of law-free zones. They're not. We're not talking about people who are disillusioned with politics. We're talking about people who are involved in very serious criminal activity and dangerous activity that is a threat to our security.
But these are promoting white supremacy, they're anti-Semitic. I mean, it's awful.
Yeah, and that's why we need to take action against it, because whatever your political view, whether you support this political party or that, and so I'm not speaking only for those that might vote for my party, actually all voters, decent people in this country, a reasonable, tolerant group of individuals in this country with different political views, of course, but the vast majority of people would absolutely no truck with those on the extreme right, those that are meddling and using knives and violence in politics. No place for that. It is illegal and we need to act on it.
Prime Minister, very good to see you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Now, that's it for this special edition of Talking Politics. Normal service resumes with Talking Politics USA on Monday and Talking Politics on Wednesday. For now, goodbye and thanks for listening.